Hey, we have a new defensive coordinator at Clemson. Hey, Dustin, I'm actually going to pause this. This went live too early. Let's just hang tight.
Okay.
We've got our first live stream in a little while because Clemson has hired a new defensive coordinator, or at least are on the verge of it, bringing in Tom Allen from Penn State. We're going to have Dustin Black join the show. He was one of the first people, probably the first person, to mention him as a viable candidate and a great hire. So he's going to join, and we're going to talk about that. To all the folks who are watching live and who hung on and enjoyed the music, first of all, thanks for listening to that music. That's by a good friend, Tom Dianor, who's been on the channel. And this channel is sponsored by Ready Vets for folks in the upstate. If you've got a dog or cat in the upstate and you have an emergency, need immediate care, can't necessarily get to your vet that second, look up Ready Vets. They're fantastic. Their Dr. Capps is a Clemson grad. So without any other hesitation, let's dive right in. I've got Dustin Black here. Dustin, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Ryan.
So let me give a little background about Tom Allen, which I know you know, and then I'm going to just kind of let you go as a little bit why you were so keen on him from the jump. So he had a long career in high school coaching, going from 92 to 2006 in the high school ranks. And then he was in a couple small colleges from 07 to 2010. It gets really interesting after that. He jumps into kind of the FBS level of coaching at Arkansas State with Hugh Freeze. He's there for a year. They're great. They go 10-3, perfect in conference play. Hugh Freeze goes to Ole Miss and he goes with him. And he's there alongside Coach Matt Luke as well. He's there for 3 years before he becomes a defensive coordinator under Willie Taggart at USF. They have a solid year, and we'll look at some of those stats later. Then he goes to Indiana. He's the DC there for just 1 year before Kevin Long is fired, and he has a really strong run by Indiana standards, particularly in 2020, where they go 6-2, have a top 20 defense. They kind of peter out there at the end, and he's let go where he goes to Penn State and has a top 10 defense. Is one of the final 4 teams remaining before obviously losing to Notre Dame. He was the coach of the year in 2020. So interesting resume for sure. Dustin, what's interesting is I was certainly not down on him. Thought he was an elite hire, but was not one of my top picks. But he was your top guy from the very start. Why don't you jump in and tell us a little bit about why?
Yeah, well, I would say the first thing that triggered me was definitely the connection with Coach Luke at Ole Miss. I think that was an important kind of connection there that, Dabo could kind of lean on that relationship, especially with, how Coach Luke came back to the coaching ranks after being a head coach and after retiring. And, working for Dabo is different. I think that's a big thing with this hire. I know a lot of people look at it and say, why would you leave Penn State, as a defensive coordinator, just become the defensive coordinator at Clemson? And I mean, I kind of think behind closed doors, working for Dabo is better than working for James Franklin in some aspects. I do think being a Penn State defensive coordinator is one of the top positions in the sport. I think perennially they have one of the top defenses in college football, and they have done that through multiple coordinators. So I'm not talking down about Penn State at all. I just think that working for Dabo is a little different in certain aspects. But I also just felt like, Dabo was going to take a big swing with this hire. I felt like he wanted to cement himself back along amongst the elite, and I felt like he needed to do that, and he needed a guy that could command the respect of the guys in that room already. I don't really think Clemson lacks good defensive coaches in the room. I didn't think he needed to overhaul the whole coaching staff. I just kind of think he needed to bring someone in who has head coaching experience, who can kind of put all the pieces together and get everyone on the same page, but also do that, by commanding respect and everything like that.
Is there anything in particular about bringing in an assistant with head coaching experience? Matt Luke also had coaching experience. What particularly do you see as an advantage of that?
The ability to delegate. I think that, when you look at having position coaches and going through game plans and stuff, and really when you see the whole picture, whenever he's a head coach at Indiana for a long time, he kind of sees how everyone game plans. So it's just like anything else, any other job, being able to see the whole picture and be able to delegate and know kind of what everyone goes through in their process every week kind of helps out.
Yeah, a couple comments here. Definitely join in the comments. Love to show these. Another one from John here, and I did check. This is not just a PSU reporter. This is true. He was a high school coach in Florida, so I know some have asked about. He's from Midwest, and then he goes to Penn State. But that connection in Florida high schools, although long ago, seems certainly beneficial. When you say.
Yeah, absolutely, and I would definitely say that's probably my biggest concern with him is recruiting. I don't think he's ever really had. A recruiting class to point to, or he hasn't done it. He hasn't sustained high levels of recruiting over his career. So I would say that's probably my biggest concern. But a lot of position coaches carry that weight now. It just particularly with the linebacker room, you kind of want to hit on some elite guys here in the coming years, losing Barrett Carter this year and Woodaz next year. So I would say that would probably be my biggest concern now, just the state of the linebacker room. What's coming up next, just his ability to recruit and be out on the trail.
Yeah, it's one of these things where you can't have it both ways. You'd love to have a coordinator who wasn't at a school like Ohio State or even to some extent Penn State, where they can have all the talent in the world. But you also want a coordinator who could bring in elite talent. So we saw what he was able to do at a school like USF or Indiana. And then when he had elite talent for 1 year at Penn State, they were a top 10 defense. So you got a little bit of a taste of both. But to your point, he wasn't at Penn State long enough to see that continued long-term elite recruiting. So I think he's a great fit. I'm going to just highlight a couple reasons why. A lot of these are from John Blau of the Post and Courier in an article he wrote. But I think some of these are pretty interesting. So obviously he was the head coach of Indiana during that 2020 season when they had top 20 defense and went 6-2. Obviously that year's kind of weird, as we were talking about before the show. COVID year, only 8 games, but nonetheless, for Indiana to have a top 20 defense, especially where they came from before he got there, really impressive. And then this year's Penn State defense was amazing. Top 8 scoring defense, top 4 total defense, great rushing defense, number 7. But I think there's like some cultural things that and just fit things with Clemson that make this really appealing. So Leo was his slogan, love each other. And that's a classic Daboism, right? And he was doing that as a head coach too. Right. So, he's doing the love each other stuff. Basically, I guess it was really like about the same time that Dabo was sort of doing it. I've heard in some Penn State like message boards that Franklin was a little bit almost like taken aback by how enthusiastic and sort of Brent Venables like he is. So, you often see when someone's hiring, they go the opposite of what they just fired, right? And so Wes Goodwin, extremely calm, not super fiery, now swinging back to more the Brent Venables style, being really fiery. He coaches linebackers. That's what obviously makes this easy. He can plug right in there and coach linebackers. You don't have to move everyone around. His 4, I guess you probably call it 4-2-5, but 4 down lineman approach commonly with lots of blitzing is exactly what Sweeney generally likes, and you don't want to be switching that around all the time. And lastly, he coached at Ole Miss, so he can't, that was in the South. And they did at Indiana, they did land Trayvon Mullen's brother, who became an All-American cornerback at Indiana. So he's got some chops there. Any thoughts on these or other reasons why you think he's a good fit?
No, I love it. I think you nailed a lot of things, specifically the point on Goodwin. I think that I'm kind of torn at sometimes when I think about the Goodwin hire, and like on one hand you want to say, well, man, like Wes Goodwin was in a great position to succeed because he was surrounded by coaches with a ton of experience. But then on the other hand, you're like, well, maybe him being surrounded by coaches with more experience than him was ultimately his downfall, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But I think, Tom Allen, especially with his personality, I think he brings the fire back to the room. I think he'll introduce some more physicality to that defense. And I think the guys are going to want to play for that guy. I think he's always had a good track record of his players enjoying him and players wanting to play for him.
Yeah, and I think generally that kind of fire, that kind of enthusiasm is infectious and good. I mean, obviously you need guys who are organized and not overly emotional. But I think you heard a lot of the offensive linemen talk about when Matt Luke came in, that he brought the energy every day, and it's kind of like just kind of forced them to elevate their energy at practice. And I think that's a little bit what you get here. Anything else you want to hit on as to why you were particularly excited about this hire from the jump?
Nothing in particular. Just like going back to what I was saying, just with Dabo wanting to take a big swing, I really only looked at coordinators at schools that were at the time still playing. So, you had your teams that I think that was the final 8 at the time when I kind of pointed him out. And I looked at the NFL a little bit, but not too much. So I never really bought into Clemson changing the scheme or not wanting to recruit different personnel. I think that, especially when you look at next year, I think the personnel at the top is pretty dang good for Clemson's defense. You kind of just want to bring someone in to kind of fine tune everything. But No, I just thought that I thought Dabo could go and get him. I thought that, it was an attainable hire. I didn't think it was outlandish to say that we could go get a Tom Allen from Penn State, and I'm glad Dabo did it. I think it was an A+ hire.
Yeah, and a couple of years ago, and really it actually started in 2018 with the Lemansky Hall hire. Dabo was the best, if not the second best coach in college football, in pretty much everyone's opinion. It was sort of silly to question anything he did. And he had so much success that he started hiring guys like Lemansky Hall. I'm not going to just throw out all the names. I don't want to bad talk him, but he started hiring guys who were Clemson grads without a lot of experience. And a lot of us thought that was foolish. A lot of us called that out. He didn't use the transfer portal, and we've complained. And people, sometimes that's upset people. But just in the last, I guess it's 3 off seasons, you've seen Garrett Riley, you've seen Matt Luke, you've seen some elite, or at least one like elite transfer, Will Helt, come in at defensive end, and now you've seen another elite outside voice come in. Maybe I'm missing something. I think Dabo's basically done everything that we've been begging for the last 3 years, and now I think they're a top 5-10 program looking at next year and long term. I mean, I don't know that I would pick more than maybe 1 or 2 teams to have a better national championship odds next year. Am I taking this too far?
I don't think so. I think that the only thing, when I look at the roster of Clemson, I think particularly on defense, maybe they don't have the championship depth that they used to have. Maybe if there's a couple injuries here and there to some certain guys, maybe you're kind of looking at maybe our ceiling's not national championship. But other than that, I mean, you line up the 22 guys that you run out there first, and I mean, I don't see why not. I think that this hire squarely puts you as ACC favorites for sure. And then, if you're winning the ACC, that means you're top 4 seed with a bye, and you only have to win 3 games to get, or really 2 games to get the national title, and then a third to win it. So, I mean, I think that Clemson's going to be a threat next year, especially with everything you have returning on offense. And I mean, if Tom Allen, with his track record of fixing defenses in year 1, can come in and make improvements, I don't see why not.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly agree with that. I think it's also worth noting that you had that run of, I guess it was probably 2016 through maybe 2020, where the national champion each year was like one of the greatest teams of all time. You think the 2018 national champion Clemson Tigers, maybe the greatest ever. And then the next year, Joe Burrow's 2019 LSU team, maybe the best one, even better than that. And then the next year, the 2020 Alabama, 2020 is sort of a weird season, but it's in the mix too. And now I feel like, that Georgia team that won with a mediocre offense. And then I don't know that I look at this Ohio State team that lost to Michigan or this Notre Dame team that lost to Northern Illinois as the type of team who would, even be competitive with that 2018 Clemson team. So I think, the roster's not where it was, especially depth-wise, compared to the 2015, 16, 17, 18, maybe even 19 Tigers. But I don't think the champions are going to be that way in the NIL era. So let me ask you this question. This comes in from Jay. How do you see Allen using the personnel we have? I think especially that's interesting with where does Khalil Barnes play? Where does Jeremiah Alexander, the transfer from Alabama, play? Just any thoughts on that?
I think that's the biggest question mark, and I think that's what we're most excited to see. I mean, how do they use Jeremiah Alexander? Is Jeremiah Alexander going to be asked to play inside linebacker most of the time, or is he going to be more of a situational pass rusher kind of guy? Wade Woodaz and Sammy Brown kind of seem like your surefire guys at linebacker. So if I had to put my money on anything, I would say that those are going to be your 2 guys run out there first. And then, he runs a multiple defense. I mean, it's base 4-2-5, but that 5th safety can be like an outside linebacker, kind of like what we saw last year when Sammy Brown, Barrett Carter, and Woodaz played. And then, you just have a lot of guys that you really haven't seen yet. I mean, especially at safety. Safety is just a room full of question marks, like a room full of guys that you just really haven't seen get meaningful snaps. I mean, you can go down the list: Kylan Webb, Ronan Hannafin, all those guys. I mean, you just don't know what you have there. Robert Billings. I mean, you've heard good things about him, but you haven't really seen him get significant snaps. So I think how he handles linebacker and how he brings along those young safeties will ultimately determine how good this defense is.
Yeah, we're talking about personnel, but I think the thing that I'm most excited about is improvements in just mid-game or in-game adjustments. I felt like you actually have to go back a couple years, but the most glaring that I've ever seen in any game was that the game against, I think it was at Wake Forest, where DJ actually played incredible and the offense was humming, and Clemson's defensive backs were just getting burned again and again and again. And they were just left in man coverage with no help every time. And finally, on like the last couple drives, they got really conservative. They stopped Wake Forest. They finally eventually won in overtime. But it was like we had to wait 3.5 quarters to make that adjustment. And I felt like we saw that a lot this year. And then against South Carolina, they proactively made an adjustment to take Sammy Brown off the field, which is like, I'm complaining you don't make good adjustments, but then you just make crazy ones. So I think that is going to make a huge difference, even with mostly similar personnel.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. I mean, there was a time in the South Carolina game where I think South Carolina ran the same exact play 2 or 3 times because we didn't give them a different look. I mean, we lined up the same exact way 3 times in a row, and each time the play got 8 or 9 yards. So South Carolina just kept running the same play over and over again, and you're sitting there, looking at the TV. What are we doing? It's just mind-boggling sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes me feel like this Tom Allen hire is high floor. Right. I broke down a lot of different candidates, and I didn't want to get someone who had no play calling experience, because Wes, by all accounts, was a phenomenal analyst and a great mind. That's one thing. But then when you're there, the pressure's on, people are screaming at you, the crowd's screaming. What adjustment are you going to make that second? That's kind of like a different world than the more intellectual sitting in your office scheming it out. And so we know that Tom Allen can do it because he just had a top defense. We've seen him do it at other places. We've seen him as a head coach to, manage a program. So I think it's extremely high floor. The odds of it being a bad hire seem pretty close to nil. Circling back to something you said that you thought it was attainable, I had my doubts. I saw Al Golden was a guy that I think it was Hamilton at the Post and Courier mentioned. I thought that was very unrealistic. I didn't see a whole lot of people talking about Tom Allen, but I sort of thought it was unrealistic because Penn State, they were in the Final Four at the time, and he was making $1.6 million. I mean, you can give him some raise, but nothing that Penn State wouldn't match. Turns out he's got daughters that live in the Carolinas, so that is probably extremely helpful. But let's jump into this last piece of data I've got here. This is just to look at some stats. I didn't put a ton of them on here. This is just scoring defense, so amount of points his defense is allowed. Not a perfect stat by any means. You got to think about strength of schedule. You got to think about how fast your offense is and all of that. But it's a high-level metric I think is helpful. So I guess if you look at the column rank, that's where they rank. You see only one top 20 defense until you get to this year. So where they're 8th. So 2 top 20 defenses. Nothing crazy they're going to get too excited about. But, and frankly, that's why I was not super enthusiastic about this as a possibility, because when you look at even this year at Penn State, they got 5 spots worse. They were a top 3 scoring defense. So I figure, hey, he took over a great defense and maintained. They're giving up 3 more points than last year. But when you look at the whole picture, he went to USF and he made that defense a good bit better. 32 spots in the rankings. That's when he was with Willie Taggart. Then he goes and he's the defensive coordinator under Kevin Long, and they take a huge jump, 60 spots. They were atrocious, and he pretty much immediately fixes them. They have that kind of mediocre 2018, but then they get better for 2 more years before everything sort of falls out under him. So seeing this, any thoughts on just how quickly he can make an impact, how long he can sustain it, anything else like that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, the instant impact in year 1 is one of the things that really drew me to him. I think that he's going to come in and fix a lot of our little things like technique or maybe some of the schematics that have kind of gone awry since Venables left. I really think that it's going to be similar to, I don't know, maybe putting him as a Coach Luke hire is kind of unfair at this time, but I think that we looked at the offensive line and you're like, okay, well, how much can we really expect from Coach Luke, in year 1? And then you watch his whole unit play an entire year and you're like, that was phenomenal. Like talking about, from what we'd seen the year before, I think it can have that similar impact. Like, I think that you're looking at, you add a couple pieces from the portal, 2 guys, which is awesome to say. But, you look at kind of basically the same personnel, losing a couple of guys, and you're like, I think this defense can still be really good. I don't think Clemson lacks talent on that side of the ball. So I think that he can come in and make, drastic changes. And I thought this year, even if our defense was bad at times, we had a chance to win a lot more games, but it was just unfortunate that our defense was terrible. You know?
Yeah, I mean, even that Texas game was very winnable,
Mhm.
if the defense was just average. Yeah, and, going back to something else you said before, Wes had less experience than the guys around him. There were all sorts of rumors about other coaches leaving, and of course, this isn't even official as of this recording, so things could still happen. But you do kind of get the feeling bringing in a guy, who's not super young, who's been a head coach, um, who just comes with a lot of credibility, maybe calms those fears and doesn't leave anyone feeling like, man, this guy's 5 years younger than me. This guy's, hasn't done what I've done. I should be the DC. Maybe bringing in a guy like Tom Allen, kind of swinging big, kind of calms that. Maybe this will age poorly, but I'm really hopeful and fairly optimistic that a guy like Mike Reed stays around. Maybe, Nick Eason, those type of guys. Clemson's been pretty good about keeping assistants around, and I'm hoping, and at least as of this recording, thinking that maybe this is the only move.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think Coach Eason may get a little bit of a bump from this. I think he may get like a co-coordinator title or something because been trying to get poached for a long time. I think he gets a lot of offers that people don't know about from the NFL and other college football teams. So I think he may end up on the other side of this with a co-coordinator title.
Well, isn't Mickey Kahn the co-coordinator?
Yeah, that's true. But I just think that, the way that they've been discussing what Easton has done, with his recruiting acumen and everything, I think that he's due for like a little bit of bump. People were low on him after this year, though. People thought that his unit didn't play that well, but it's going to be interesting to see him with a new coordinator for sure. But I think the one word really that Tom Allen brings in is confidence. I think confidence is the key here. I think that a lot of those guys lost confidence in Wes. I don't think they really trusted the technique that they were learning. I don't think they trusted, like you said, the adjustments that were being made in game. I think that Tom Allen brings confidence back to that defense and kind of that swagger that we had during the Venables area. Because, I mean, whenever we had Venables as a coordinator, those guys stepped on the field knowing and believing in what they were doing. And I don't think that was the case towards the end of that Goodwin tenure.
Yeah, I agree. I think Wes's like schemes and pregame planning was fine. I don't really critique
Mm-hmm.
that, but you look at the player development and growth at linebacker. Well, from sophomore year or senior year, Barrett Carter's PFF grades went down every year, and he
Yep.
wasn't necessarily getting hurt. And Wade Woodess has been very good, but he hasn't. Those PFF grades don't really go up, or at least not much. You don't see guys just massively improve under him. And linebacker play has always been an area where every year we come in and we say we have the best linebacking core in the entire country, and every year they're fine and they're not bad,
Yeah.
but they're not elite. And then, of course, we talked about in-game adjustments. So I think you see player development and in-game adjustments is where you could see a really big jump. Last thing I want to hit on is just personnel. We talked about a linebacker. They've got two studs in Woodaz and Sammy Brown. And then now Jeremiah Alexander comes in as a transfer from Alabama. So there's three linebackers. Then you have Kylon Griffin and Khalil Barnes at safety. But as you mentioned, it's often more of a 4-2-5. So maybe they don't use three linebackers, although I actually liked that at the end of the year when they did that and actually sometimes slowed down the run. But how do you see all that shaken out? Do you see more transfers coming in, guys who are more than just a punter? Just any thoughts on personnel?
Yeah, well, I don't think that I don't think anyone comes from Penn State. I don't think Tom Allen was there long enough to recruit a guy, develop him, and kind of have like a really tight relationship. He may have made a big impact in some lives there, but I don't think that anyone's going to follow him to Clemson. But I think that Clemson's probably done in the portal, except for maybe a punter and a safety. Maybe, but like I said earlier, we have 100 safeties. Like we have a lot of safeties on the roster. So I don't know. Maybe I think that's going to be something that's going to be sorted out in the spring. I think you go through spring ball with the new coordinator, see how the pieces kind of fall, let the cream rise to the top, and then see where you're at. But I don't know that he brings anyone from Penn State. I don't know if this is the proper platform for this, but kind of a hot take is you kind of see a blueprint going on in the Big Ten. You saw 2023 Michigan bring a lot of players back, win a national title. You saw 2024 Ohio State bring a lot of players back that could have gone to the NFL, and they're playing for the title next year. Penn State's going to do the same thing. Penn State's going to a lot of these guys are going to come back and play an extra year, kind of following that blueprint of what Michigan and Ohio State did, and they're going to be a top 5 team next year for sure. So I don't think a lot of those guys are going to want to leave. I think they're going to want to run it back with a lot of the same guys and really kind of do what the past two teams in the Big Ten have done.
Yeah, and Drew Aller, their quarterback, is coming back, which is huge for them.
Yep, huge.
And Clemson, there was an article today that the 110 Society, obviously after maybe not doing as well in previous years, had an incredible offseason, mostly focused on retention, but also nabbing big time transfers, including Will Helt, who had interest from A&M and LSU, plenty of places with money. They really hit a home run this year. And the CEO or whatever you call the leader of the 110 Society basically said, I'm looking forward to not having to do this because of, revenue sharing. So we'll see how all of that shakes out. But I think they hit a home run, and this will be one of the, I'd say maybe the most talented Clemson team since 2019, maybe 2020, but really that defense in 2020 had lost a lot. So maybe even since 2019. Let's see if there's any new questions. Oh, this is one, and it's fine if you're not familiar with this. This is strength and conditioning. I don't anticipate any changes in strength and conditioning. I don't know if you do, but special teams was certainly a problem. And I saw that, I'll pull the year, but Tom Allen at one point was coaching special teams. Any expectations of other changes, title changes to special teams, anything like that? It was at Ole Miss. He was, according to Wikipedia at least, special teams and linebacker.
No, I don't. I mean, like that kind of hire, I'm just gonna have to see it to believe it with Dabo. He hasn't really ever, done that with special teams. He's kind of just thrown that title around to different guys. I mean, Mickey Conn had it for a little bit. Now Coach Reed is the one who's the special teams coordinator. I don't anticipate that really changing.
Gotcha. Well, any other thoughts on this hire or next year's Clemson team, or anything else you want to hit before we get out of here?
No, I'm excited about Clemson football. I think they've had a really good past, whatever you want to call it. I mean, like beating SMU in the ACC championship game with that walk-off field goal, getting to play in a playoff game again, and really the offense showing growth was awesome. And now you've gotten two defenders from the portal. You've gotten a new DC. I mean, there's just a lot to be excited about for Clemson football, and it feels good to be excited and to be able to say things like you said. I think that they're a top 5 team next year and they're squarely in the national title hunt. I mean, that's just something we haven't really been able to say for a while and truly believe it. So I'm just excited about the direction of the program. And, Dabo's got me all the way back invested in Clemson football for sure.
Yeah. And I'll end with a similar note, because after the South Carolina loss, I remember thinking, man, if Coach Sweeney doesn't really take some serious change in the portal and coaching, obviously I'm going to go to every game. I'm going to watch every game. I'm going to do videos about every game, but I'm not going to let myself be emotionally invested in a team that's probably headed to 8-4. I can't do it again. And, then they back into the ACC and I'm like, oh man, why are they doing this to me? Why am I excited again? And then as they get to the offseason, not overly disappointed in the Texas loss because the offense did well. I was thinking you have to change your DC, and they do. And then they bring in an elite defensive end. And then they brought in Tristan Smith, not elite, but a pretty solid high PFF grade wide receiver. And I was thinking, okay, he's not playing around anymore. He's doing all the things that I said were holding him back. And now this. So, yeah, I'm all in. I think this is, up there with any team in the country, Georgia, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas. I think Clemson has finally put themselves, after whatever it is, a 5-year hiatus of having the elite name, but maybe not the elite team or staff. I think they're back. So with that, we'll end there. Dustin, I really appreciate you doing this. And folks, don't forget to follow him on X. There's his handle there, DustinB429. Dustin, thanks, man.
Yeah, appreciate you, Ryan.